Moss Media.
Welcome to Beyond the Doors, where real estate pros Nate and Daniel bring you the latest market trends, the stories behind the big deals, and the inside scoop on housing politics. With years of experience and a good dose of fun, they break it all down alongside interesting guests and experts in the field. So, if you want to know what's really going on in the world of real estate, you're in the right place.
Welcome to the Beyond the Doors podcast. We're going to take the next half an hour or so to really get beyond the doors. So real estate's a complex, ever-evolving industry. Many people see it as the house or the buildings they pass by, but there is a ton that happens beyond the doors. Policy, advocacy, building challenges, zoning challenges, you name it. So we're going to take this time to kind of expose some of that, detail it, dive into it, and really have some fun with the conversations around housing. I've got my co-host here, Nate Abbo. I'm Daniel Skolnick. We've got a special guest here, Ricardo Flores. We're going to have a really vivid conversation with. But it's been a hot minute since I've seen you, Nate. How you been?
Yeah, man. How are you, man? Everything good? What's up with you in your world, man?
We've been busy. We broke ground on 3 projects in the last 3 weeks. We've got 5 offers out on some new ones. And we're in the process of refinancing 2 buildings. Luckily, interest rates have moderated substantially over the last 30 to 45 days. So we're keeping our fingers crossed it stays that way through the end of the year as we get these things done. But listen, it's been hectic, but it's been a blessing, you know?
No, that's huge news in our world. It's always good to hear what's going on your side, the building side, compared to my side, the real estate kind of sales side. I've kind of had a wild week too, finished up an 18-month project. That's kind of small time for me, kind of, you know, and for you, it's kind of a normal thing. But new sales, new buyers, trying to put people in these houses, figuring out ways to get them in. I'm excited about our guest today because I think he's going to have some ideas on how to get people in these houses.
100%. Well, you and I usually have a lot of time to catch up, so I'm not going to waste people's time talking. I want to get Ricardo some airtime here. So without further ado, let's talk about some of the things that you have on your mind. I'm excited to have this conversation. We're going to have a conversation about advocacy, innovation, and housing policy. We're going to try to stay on brand, though. So really expose beyond the doors, right? What happens that people don't typically see, all the struggles, tribulations, and hard work it takes to create policy and really move the needle in housing. That's what we'd love to focus on today. You've got a fascinating background, Ricardo. You are the executive director of LISC San Diego. You are the former chief of staff for a city council member. But I'm going to let you really give some background and insight as to, you know, what you've done, your career, and maybe give us a quick bio.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm very excited about this conversation. My background's really interesting. Like you said, I started at UCLA, went to film school. I actually worked in the film industry for a little bit. My last job there was working in DreamWorks, the movie studio, and I worked on Shrek 2, believe it or not. And then I went abroad, was an English teacher for a quick year in Barcelona, and came back here and got a job with a congresswoman, and that started my work in politics. And born and raised in San Diego, my parents are teachers, and so really working in government and helping people out was something that was already kind of a calling to me. I just didn't realize it until I started to do it. And then, as you mentioned, I became a chief of staff at the city of San Diego, ran for office, wasn't successful, but I got a call from this organization called LISC, a nonprofit CDFI, or Community Development Financial Institution, and it provides, believe it or not, loan dollars for pre-development to affordable housing developers from banks. The money's from banks because of their large CRA, or Community Reinvestment Act, obligations. And really, it's led me to here with you all because I was not really very well versed in a lot of zoning and different things like that. And having worked at the city as a chief of staff, I can tell you, I did not understand the stuff I'm telling you today. And many people at City Hall, even though that is their main priority, is zoning and land use, don't understand it. And I think that's why many of you and your colleagues in your industry are so baffled by the laws that come down and so concerned about how difficult it is to build, when in reality, it makes no sense.
100%. I mean, development and housing are one of those things where a small tweak can have a monumental change, because it's not just about policy, it's about implementation and the mechanics of seeing it through. I mean, you just mentioned a beautiful point. We deal with that day in and day out, and little things make a big difference.
It's shocking to me if you ask a local politician, do you control the cost of land? They will say, well, we can't control land costs, we can't control that, but they do control the cost of land because they tell us and they mandate that we buy a certain amount of land to live in certain communities.
Totally.
And if they change that, that lowers the price. Because again, if you're buying 5,000 square feet or 1,000 square feet, there's going to be a difference in cost. And that's called middle income housing. And the fact that they do not intuitively understand that is perpetuating this housing crisis because again, they think it's the market, but they are the sole individuals responsible for that. And in fact, as you all know, in the affordable housing industry and in your industry, we call land a fixed cost.
Totally.
But it's not a fixed cost to government, right? And so that language gives them the feeling that, oh, they don't have anything to do with this, right? But they do. They absolutely do. And if they change that requirement, it'll have such a significant effect for you all to go out there and do what you need to do, which is build housing.
Absolutely. I mean, zoning's at the forefront of that, right?
The forefront of that. It is, people like to say, well, rent control and things like that. But in San Diego County, it's interesting that we've never had rent control, and yet we don't have any housing being built.
Let's go down that path. So we're talking housing today. And so I usually like to understand how an issue even came about, right? I think it's safe to say we have a housing crisis,
right.
We have an affordability crisis.
Right.
But looking back, where do you think we went wrong with housing initially? And how did we get here? Because we're going to talk about how to fix it. I know you got a lot of great policies that you're working on, you've helped implement. But let's give a brief background. How did we get here?
Well, it's a fascinating story, and it's not a very well-known story. There are some books out there, Richard Rothstein and others that have written Color of Law. But people don't really know. If you talk to folks that are fighting against change in their neighborhood and saying, we want to preserve single family, ask the simple question, well, where did single family zoning come from? And they have no clue. But what we have found and what is becoming more known now is that single family zoning started at the city of Berkeley in 1916 as a response for a particular developer named Duncan McDuffie. And McDuffie had a problem. He had built these beautiful homes in an area called Claremont, and outside of his community was a neighborhood called Elmwood. In Elmwood, the deed restrictions were expiring, and also, unfortunately, a black dance hall and a Chinese laundry and a Japanese laundry were moving in, and McDuffie did not want that to happen. And so the city of Berkeley, with McDuffie on the lead, created a commission to study zoning around the United States. And believe it or not, in the early 1900s, there were very few places that had zoning, very few places. And they found a law in Minneapolis that allowed 2 units on one piece of land, or a duplex. And they took the next logical step was 1 unit per land, and therefore single family zoning was born.
Amazing.
And so again, it was born at the margins of really this conversation that this country's really had a challenge with, which is segregation and integration of neighborhoods, not community areas, but neighborhoods. Right. And what's fascinating too is about 20 months later, the Supreme Court would later rule that overt racism in zoning laws was illegal. So McDuffie and them were, in a sense, ahead of the curve by understanding very early on, and they probably knew the court case was snaking its way, but they knew they couldn't be overtly racist in their codes. And so that's why, again, if you look at the Berkeley 1916 ordinance, and it doesn't mention race. It seems so benign. You just have to have a certain amount of land, and this is where this goes and that goes, and it seems common sense. But again, at its origins, it's very, very nefarious. And we know that because all you have to do is look around neighborhoods today. And we still have that same demographic profile that we had 100 years ago. And interestingly enough, the city of San Diego would pass zoning in 1923. So it's literally been 100 years since the city of San Diego has had zoning. And again, in their documents, they actually state that their goal was to pass zoning, but not to interfere with deed restrictions at that time.
Right.
And then the city of San Diego was, again, ahead of the curve. But in 1926, the Supreme Court would bless this whole idea of limiting apartments in single-family zones. And that really has been the basis of the zoning code from that point on.
Incredible. And here we are now where I would say we're going through an awakening. And,
yes.
And it's been a forced awakening.
Yes.
Things got so out of hand. Affordability is through the unaffordability, for that matter, is through the roof. And so I'm going to let Nate chime in on that. I think he had some questions for you.
Unaffordability is through the roof.
Yes,
right?
Sir.
Zoning is a problem.
It is the problem.
I think inventory
is what's creating this huge gap between affording a property and not.
Right.
I think I know a little bit about LISC and what LISC San Diego and what you guys are doing. I think I'd love it if you can maybe break it down a little bit more as far as what can be accomplished through this, because I think it does maybe create inventory, and I think that could create a problem. One, affordability just naturally calming down because of more inventory, but two, kind of in capping what they can be sold for. I think if you can tell us more about that, I think people would love to hear about it.
Yeah, so LISC is interesting. LISC is in the affordable housing game, and we're in the game where we support developers that are going after tax credits. So really like towers of affordability, right? Really big projects. And LISC was created in the late 1970s as a spinoff of the Ford Foundation, the philanthropic organization, because the question was posed to Ford and others, how can we help inner city America? And it's the late 70s or so. And LISC was created again as a CDFI, which all your listeners will know is really what all credit unions are CDFIs. And yet we didn't take money from depositors, and we still don't. Our money comes from banks because of their obligations on their Community Reinvestment Act. And what I mean by that is they lend LISC hundreds of millions of dollars every year at about a 3% interest. We then, in turn, it's recourse to us. And LISC is not just here in San Diego, but we're in 37 other markets around the United States. We then re-lend that money out with another little spread, because as you guys know, it costs money to move money, which seems so counterintuitive in the world, but it is. And we lend that out as pre-development. And we're integral to that space because, as you know, banks are very reluctant to provide pre-development monies because, frankly, what's in the land? They have no clue. What's the collateral? The land that may turn out to have nothing but a value to it, whether they don't even know the zoning. So LISC will lend to those developers, affordable housing developers. They'll buy the land, begin the site control, begin the due diligence, and then we'll be taken out by a construction loan. So that's really kind of our the way we operate. And we're not alone. There's others in our space, but we're integral to that building. This project and what we're working on here really comes from the idea that after George Floyd was killed, are we doing more good than harm? And we are doing good. But again, we are following developers and where they're building. And many of those projects are being built in certain neighborhoods. And in some ways, it's exacerbating some of the poverty and the challenges they face, because we all know in this room, your zip code determines your future, plain and simple. And so as a response to that, and as a response to thinking about not everybody just aspires to affordable housing, they aspire to wealth, we started to think about, well, what could we do in this space here locally? And it just so happens that guy came up with this idea, and I didn't come up with it, but figured out that if you make land smaller, it's cheaper.
So what you're talking about is a new spearhead legislation and policy, which you're calling home ownership for SD, right?
Correct.
And I think it's important for our listeners to understand that affordability and housing is bisected into two main components. You've got for rent, and then you've got for sale housing, right?
Correct.
And there's a lot of policy and legislation around for rent, right?
Correct.
We have both subsidized and unsubsidized affordable housing. We've got apartments, market rate. We've got deed. There's a lot of mechanisms, and it's been around for a long time now to help create affordable housing. Now, is it all working properly? I think we could all agree that there's a lot of room for improvement, but it's a mechanism. But I would say it's fairly new and innovative to really parlay that into for sale housing. And Ricardo, you said it right best, that the largest transfer of wealth or largest investment or asset someone owns is typically their home. And so I love what you're doing with this new initiative. Let's unpack it, because what Nate and I are looking at here is a beautiful graphic of a 5,000 foot lot subdivided into 5 lots with 2,000 square foot starter homes in each one, and on-site parking. So what I'm looking at is a Da Vinci, but I want our listeners to hear about it. So let's talk about home ownership for SD. Not only what it is, let's talk about what you're doing to spearhead it and how it came about.
So, when again, the research in terms of the history of single family zoning is really not common. And so when I started to really figure it out, I started to go to partners in San Diego, other nonprofit organizations that are into housing, but not necessarily into for sale housing, many of them affordable housing developers. And I started to say to them, do you know this history? And they were shocked. And I said, but there's a way around this. What we can do is do the opposite, which is if you have to mandate 5,000 square feet, well, you can mandate less than 5,000 square feet. And oh, by the way, that will lower the cost of the housing because that's common sense, 1,000 square feet versus 5,000 square feet. And so they started to say, we're willing to go on this journey with you. And a lot of it, I think, had to do because LISC and who we are. You know, we've been in San Diego for 30 years. We're basically essentially a lender for real estate. So when we speak, people go, oh, yeah, they must know what they're talking about. You guys are lending millions of dollars to build affordable housing, to buy land.
Right.
And so that credibility was really important. And then the second part of this was really starting to realize that we need to go to our council offices and explain to them that there is a way out of this mess and they actually control it. And so we started to write op-eds and we started to talk more about it. And little by little, we've gotten more traction. Even the groups like the California YIMBY crowd, who really have, kudos to them for really making it known that it's a supply issue. But again, they were looking at the world, at least when I was involved, or still am, but early on, they were looking at the world and saying, one piece of land, how much rental units can you put on it? And we kept saying, well, wait a minute, why not home ownership? And it just so happened that after George Floyd was killed, the San Diego Foundation created a home buyer program that at the time was targeted to Black families in response to that. And so what we started to think about was, why can't we figure out how to build for these families if they so desire in really good neighborhoods? But again, the challenge is the price. And so you can't disrupt the price of the market, but you can make it smaller in terms of land. And it's still a challenge for people to understand that you can live on 1,000 square feet of land and you can still have a 2,000 square foot home.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, you can always look up, right? It's not just lateral.
And it's only 3 stories. And there's a lot of homes overlooking canyons right
Absolutely.
above us here that are 3 stories already. So there's a way out of this scenario, of this challenge. So I think a lot of those groups were really interested and really passionate about this. And really, I think it's starting to get more into gear recently when I started working with a gentleman named Gary London. And I explained to him what we were trying to do. And I explained to him that the goal is to be real simple, just allow this to happen ministerially over the counter. And Gary said, I know what you're trying to do. I want to help. And that's really when I think we started to have a real interest. And Gary was able to do something that people kept asking me about, but I really couldn't crunch the numbers in that respect, is how much would these homes be? And Gary, because he's worked on current projects and in the past as well, he estimated it's going to be 40 to 50% cheaper than the existing single family home.
Stay tuned to Beyond the Doors. We'll be right back after a quick break.
Hey, it's Daniel from Beyond the Doors. We're super excited to be a part of the OLS Media Network. Recording right here in San Diego alongside some amazing podcasts. There's a host of wonderful shows from all types of genres. For you cannabis fans, there's a hilariously blunt podcast from March and Ash. For the true San Diegan who wants to know more about their local officials and their journey to success, there's Dear San Diego with my good friend Tony Manolatos. And of course, there's a true crime podcast with one of the most notable prosecutors in California history, Anne-Marie Schubert. Basically, like real estate, there's a little something for all walks of life. You won't want to miss it. So head over to olasmedia.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to follow or subscribe while you're there. Now let's get back to the show.
We're back. Let's pick up where we left off here with our special guest.
And let's talk about what the existing single-family home costs. Nate, you're a top real estate agent. Let's talk about what does a starter home cost today in San Diego?
So, well, the average house is costing about $1,050,000 countywide, which is a huge number net now.
Huge.
Now we can go into kind of the more less expensive areas, and we're still talking,
But still,
$750,000. So it's still a high number any way you look at it.
Yeah, so average price is $1 million. Looking at the affordability of that, in order to qualify for a mortgage today on $1 million home, you got to have a median family income of about $250,000.
Yes.
But if we look at the stats, AMI in San Diego is hovering around 115, 116,000. So it's half of where it needs to be for people to afford homes. So the numbers kind of talk for themselves, right? It's incredible.
They absolutely do. And the other thing too that I wanted to share too is that when you allow more people to be homeowners, you increase the property taxes in the city. And the example that I like to give folks is the county estimated that all the property in the county of San Diego is worth $700 billion. But the city of San Diego, which has probably the best land, only captures about $700 million. That number is way out of whack, and that's got everything to do with this antiquated system of zoning that we've had for 100 years and that is in part of 80% of our city.
So the issue, it sounds like the issue is we're not optimizing the existing land we have. What we're doing is we're getting 1 + 1 = 2, but we're not thinking how to get
Absolutely.
1 + 1 = 3, because that's how you move the needle.
It's really interesting if you think about it, right? So people before us, politicians, government, philanthropy, everybody, they've made this community such a great place to live that people want to live here, which has driven up the cost of land, which is a
Right.
normal thing. That's
Totally.
a good thing. But then you now have to say the land has so much value, which is again a good thing, that you can't consume at the same amount that you did previously unless you can afford it. And what you're saying is we can't afford it, which is true. So therefore you have to make it smaller to consume. So I don't even know if it's an economics formula, but it seems like common sense, right? And again, like you're saying, you look around neighborhoods. I live in Kensington, and that neighborhood those neighborhoods are under punching how much we're capturing as a public for the land's value. Right. And then on top of that, in some neighborhoods like mine, we say, oh, it's a historic neighborhood, so we're going to pay even less property taxes. So we're doing everything totally counterintuitive and wondering, and our politicians are wondering, why can't we afford sewer? Why can't we afford this? Why can't we afford that? But you're a wealthy community. It's because we're not paying enough of the taxes. And the really interesting thing, I think, is going to be this generational divide, because young people are very frustrated, right? The three of us have bought into the system. We either own or we were going to own, but we're bought in. It's that young generation, maybe your children, that are looking at this and going, this makes no sense. That my home is worth $2 million with the home I grew up in.
Totally. So to break this down, right, the philosophy behind buying or having a large lot, dividing it, you're basically chopping up the 800-pound gorilla, because it's too much for one person to digest.
That's
and
right.
it's ineffective, inefficient.
Totally.
And look, let's talk about real estate valuations. Look, my business, I buy small houses, big lots all the time. Mm-hmm. The arbitrage, the nuance is in pricing land. Everyone's gotten really good, especially with Zillow.com, Redfin. Price per square foot. It's pretty easy to triangulate what a home is worth. It's a lot harder to triangulate what's the residual lot value worth.
Correct.
A program and a policy like you're proposing basically does the homework for you, because now you've chopped that up.
That's right.
You've empowered 5 families to own the same amount of land, but you're housing a lot more people with the same amount of land for less money. I guess the question is, what do we think these houses would sell for if we were able to do that, right? And
so Gary London, that was the question that all policymakers were asking me, because again, my background, they knew me, they understood what lists could do, but they were saying, well, how much is it going to cost? And I really couldn't answer that question. But Gary London from London Motor and Associates said, you know what? I have the answer, because I'm working on a project like this. And he's been doing this for 30 plus years. He estimated, and we wrote an op-ed on this, 40 to 50% cheaper than the existing home.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned that earlier. So we're talking about 40 to 50% less than the median price today. So now you're putting a starter home.
Yep.
I mean, cut 50% off from $500K.
6, whatever.
Well, now if you look at where AMI is.
Yep. You're matching AMI.
You can match AMI. And there's actually, the numbers really do speak for themselves.
It's really that simple. And that's what's so nuts about this whole thing.
They try to complicate it. They try to say, no, it's a job thing. We've got to bring jobs here. But it's a zoning thing.
It's a zoning thing. It's always been a zoning thing. It's just been buried and buried and buried. And again, there's no losers in this, because if you're right now listening to this conversation, you're sitting on 5,000 square feet of land, and all of a sudden tomorrow the city council allows you to subdivide it into 5 units, and you sell Monday morning, your realtor is going to say your land has more value.
It pumps up the market.
Because it pumps up the market, and so that's a good thing, because then you could take that additional extra land or value, you could go to a bank theoretically, get a loan off of it, and then subdivide your land. Right. So it's the market reinforces itself. And then like I mentioned a second ago, it also provides more tax receipts to the city to do services. And then the other thing too that's really interesting is our friends that are concerned about the climate, they're trying to figure out how we get out of our cars, right? Which is a very difficult proposition in the world we currently live in today. You start subdividing neighborhoods or allow people to subdivide, and you start to fill that in with little stores and other
Absolutely.
amenities. You have just solved that Rubicon. And walkability, and also water, electricity, sewer, all that stuff is now cost shared by way more families than the existing one block. There really is no rationale why we don't do this other than the proverbial, I didn't grow up like this.
Right. Well, San Diego has evolved, right? I mean, look at New York, look at Chicago, look at San Francisco, look at Tokyo, look at these tier 1 cities. San Diego has gotten there.
It absolutely has.
And so our housing policy and our land massing has to evolve in order to support the growth. Otherwise, we'll start to falter. And I don't think that's not good for the residents, not good for business. That's just not how a city survives and thrives.
You're going to do something that, at least I've read in books, that is really counterintuitive. You're going to make an area that is really highly valuable in terms of jobs and job salaries. And you're actually going to tell people to leave that area and go to areas with lower salary, lower job expectations. That makes no sense to do something like that.
100%.
And so it's something that is going to happen, whether or not this generation that really pushes back, and I hate to say the boomers, my parents, push back on this. Younger generations and our generation at some point are just going to say, we give up, because all of us in this room, are going to be around a while. We want to retire. We want to enjoy our lives. And if the young people below us do not succeed in starting families and having home ownership, then what does that mean for us?
Right.
So we are going to do it, Alvar, just because it's on selfish preservation.
Yep.
And mind you, too, the other little thing that people do not remember here, and I don't know why, is that this country has done exactly what I'm talking about. They did this after the GI Bill, after World War II. It didn't go to every family, as we know.
Of course.
But they provided white males mainly a free home and a mortgage after their service. Plus, they incentivized the housing market by the construction of the suburbs, which was new at the time. And then they doubled down and gave free education to those people. And these boomers, who many of them are living in homes in my neighborhood, many of them were the first generation to receive a home as inheritance. Because prior to World War II, if you were in the real estate market, you had to put 50% down and pay it off in 5 years. There were very few homeowners,
of course.
White, black, brown, all over. It was this giant divide after the GI Bill that has basically created the world we see today. And we need to do that for these young people. We need to get them the same opportunity. Us Gen Xers, it's over for us.
Totally.
But for these young people, we need to do that.
Yep. Well, and that's the only way to keep them here too. Right? Otherwise, we're going to lose intellectual capital. Families will break apart. We're not going to be able to stay here.
I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, one person, when he went public, the tax receipts in the state of California just jumped one day.
Totally.
That's a huge part of this initiative. I mean, we're not talking about it's generational wealth and how it's created through real estate. That's something I've learned a long time ago. And a lot of people don't even get a chance to kind of understand that. But giving them a chance to buy a home for $500,000, then that's their only chance. Otherwise, they're not going to, it's going to be very difficult to find another chance like that. Leave it to the next person. It's a path to prosperity. We're trying to work on this issue we have going on in this country and this state. And this is just another vehicle, I think, to that. I love the idea. Versus maybe building affordable housing, which that benefits maybe the builder, but even the builder has challenges.
Well, and the
with
people living there, but they're two different vehicles.
Yeah, for sure. One is somebody has a chance to create wealth. Other person's going to get stuck in the renting world forever. But you're a builder. It's hard to build with the affordable housing and the incentives they provide for that for builders. It's more geared for the builder, not for the creating wealth for a low income.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with all of that.
You don't think so?
Look, the builders are entrepreneurs, right? They're business people. You can't be in business without solving a problem. The problem is there. Someone needs to satiate it and fix it. And then the people that are living there, look, I'll tell you firsthand, we built under the ADU density bonus program predominantly. I've seen that program change people's lives because people who are in quote unquote affordable housing were relegated to where affordable housing was.
Correct.
The ADU density bonus program created equity throughout the city. Now those folks can live almost in any neighborhood in the city.
Correct.
And it's opening up new opportunities. So it's an interconnected puzzle. And actually, I want to unpack that a little bit more because since we're talking about San Diego policy, San Diego's been a pioneer in innovative housing, in housing policy. I think nationally, we might have some of the most interesting policy in place currently. I would love to get your take, Ricardo, on why do you think our elected officials are getting it, faster and better than other places in the country. Because yes, we're all in San Diego. We care, but housing right now isn't only a local issue; it's a state issue, and elections around the corner. It's a national issue as well. So our elected are getting it. I give them a lot of credit. I want to hear your thoughts on why others are missing it.
So it's interesting. Like I said, I worked at the city council when we had a Republican mayor and we had a divided council. And what I think has really happened here is now we have a council that's all Democratic and we have a Democratic mayor. But I think that we don't have a history of one party rule. And so there is a little bit of that conservative mentality. And so when there are places and spaces where you go and you talk like this and people say, absolutely, I want to be helpful to you. I want to help your campaign.
Right.
We're not at the point where it's just, no. We're dogmatic. We're still less dogmatic in that respect. The other thing too is, we are farther away again than Sacramento, and LA is a little bit north of us, and San Francisco's farther away. That again, we have our own culture here, and we kind of have a do-it-yourself culture, right? We're not really expecting people to help us out. And so I think a lot of our innovation in San Diego comes from us working together, but us trying different things.
I love it.
So I think that's why San Diego's so ripe for something that we're talking about here. Because ultimately, I think, and the other thing is San Diego really, it's funny, I'm born and raised here, maybe you guys are too, but we always want to punch above our weight. We know that we're great. We just want everybody else to realize we're great. Maybe a little inferiority complex here.
Right. A little Napoleon
complex.
A
little Napoleon complex here compared to our sister cities, right?
Well, that's a blessing because necessity breeds innovation.
And also the need to want to do great breeds entrepreneurship and wanting to be great. And so I think that we don't have a history like LA or San Francisco of some of these very dogmatic ways. I think we're open to new ways. Now that doesn't last forever. And so that's why I think it's so important that we really start to work now and making these changes, because you could see a generation later, people will say, well, I don't know anymore.
Right. Let's unpack that a little bit further. We've got two big policy initiatives that already occur at the state level. They're going to affect renters, homeowners, developers, real estate agents, and policymakers. That's AB 1033, which is going to allow cities to sell individual ADUs. To allow homeowners to sell individual ADUs. And then we've got SB 10, which has been a popular topic amongst the policy circles. Can you share your thoughts and your vision as how those two will really move the needle in housing?
So again, I think we're all trying to figure out a way to change the fact that 80% of our city is zoned for one thing and one thing only. And that when we passed that law 100 years ago, we were a city of like 75,000 people, and now we're 1.3 million. And we're wondering, wait a minute, why are we having trouble growing? I think what the ADU proposal does is it's an attempt in that direction. It's sort of throwing things at the wall. It's not probably as clean as you want it, but it's an attempt.
Right.
The challenge with that becomes the devil in the details, which is, you also have to enter into a contract with the person in front of you because you have to share water and power and things like that. And that could be kind of problematic. People may not want to do that. But ultimately, again, it's pretty common sense. Like, people talk about, ADUs, and like you said, you're building them. The challenge with ADUs is you can't own the ADU. So again, you're only looking at people and saying, you must be renters. Right. And again, in this country, the American dream, I think, is most associated with homeownership, owning land. And especially in Southern California, it's not owning air rights, it's owning the dirt and the home.
Well, that's the empowerment component of it.
That's exactly right. And so I think the ADU proposal is a good step. We should definitely adopt it. There's no reason not to adopt it. It will show, it's kind of a small step to show the city council that, I'm getting property taxes now from this unit and this unit, right, and these people are owning, and how much are they owning for? Again, the devils are in the details, because you can't build ADUs to a certain, I believe, a certain size.
They can only be up to 1,200 square feet. But I guess it's another cog in the wheel, because
absolutely
what you're proposing under Homeownership SD, that's going to give people true starter homes.
That's a true starter home.
Priced, maybe $5, maybe in the 500s, maybe in the 6, maybe in the 4s. We don't know for sure, but they're true starter homes. Whereas the ADU might even be a prelude to that, where, listen, people are all across the economic scale. That could open doors for them, and then you go from there to the starter home. And
absolutely,
there's a ladder to be. Basically, this legislation is giving people a ladder to climb.
It's another vehicle for people to get more equity out of the land that they own. Right?
Understood.
So that's very important. With respect to SB 10, so SB 10, I think, in a lot of ways, was really doing this exact thing here. It was saying you can subdivide your land up to 1,000-foot increments. It just so happened that if you had 10,000 square feet of land, which is not that common in San Diego, and also flat land as well, that you could put 10 homes on it. And so people gravitated towards the 10. Oh my God, the 10, when in reality, most people are not going to be able to put that much on. But again, it allowed for this, and I think it allowed for a conversation that needed to happen. There were some gimmicks on there that I think are a little challenging, but again, the spirit of it was the state will allow you to subdivide land in a legal way, ministerially, over the counter, if you so desire, municipality. Yeah. So it actually opened the door, but the city decided not to walk in. And it wasn't even the city council, it was really the planning commission. And I think, again, there were people that looked at this, people like yourselves who are in your industry, who looked at this and said, wait a minute, I don't want my neighborhood to change, my personal neighborhood. Therefore, I'm saying no to this. And I think that's the other challenge with this whole conversation is you find a lot of smart people that I've been 30 years an architect, I've been 20 years a builder. And they will say, these things that we're talking about today will destroy our communities, will destroy. So it's almost like a doctor saying, no, you don't have the disease, even though you have the disease. Right.
It takes time. Change is painful.
Yeah.
Change takes time. Sometimes change just needs to be forced.
It does.
And then people either adapt or realize they were scared of the boogie monster that didn't exist.
It's just,
we've seen that happen.
It's a reality. I mean, we have to grow, right? We have to grow. The human body changes, right? So how can we stop changing our communities?
Fantastic.
I think this is it's a real answer for a real problem. I appreciate you frontlining an initiative like that. Yeah. How can people listening learn more about what you're doing, support what you're doing?
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. So I think just reach out to Google LISC, LISC San Diego, LISC San Diego, and my name, Ricardo Flores, and find us and sign up. We have a homeownership website. You can sign up for to get information from us. But you just go to our website, and my email is rflores@lisc.org. Email me and tell me you like what you heard. And if you don't, that's fine too. Because again, this is all part of change. And so the conversation, even with people that are completely against this, they need to understand the facts. And if they don't want to believe the facts, that's up to them. But these are the facts, right? This is like math. 1 + 1 = 2, right?
Absolutely.
You can't change that fact.
Absolutely. Well, that's Beyond the Doors podcast. I think we exposed a lot of things beyond the doors. It was a fascinating conversation. Ricardo, thank you so much. Nate, always a pleasure. That was a pretty dynamic dialogue.
Thank you.
We're going to have to unpack a lot of things we covered today, so thank you.
Hey, have me back anytime. As you guys can tell, I love talking about this, and I'm evangelical, and I think it's because I don't really come from this industry naturally, but once I've kind of understood enough, and I thought to myself, wait a minute, everybody, especially people at City Hall, should hear this.
Absolutely.
Because if they do it and they respond accordingly, we will solve our housing crisis.
I love it.
It's that powerful.
Action.
That's the only thing we can do, right?
Absolutely.
Great
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for joining us today, Ricardo. To the audience, thank you for joining us on Beyond the Doors. I'm Nathan Abbo, real estate agent with Coldwell Banker West. Anybody who ever wants to talk real estate, I can be reached at Nate Abbo Homes.
And I'm Daniel Skolnick, founder and CEO of Atlas West Group. If you'd like to talk about the show or learn about the projects we're developing, you can find me at atlaswestgroup.com.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Doors. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To hear other episodes or read the associated blogs, visit olismedia.com, and be sure to follow the hosts on Instagram at Nate Abbo Homes and at atlaswestgroup.com. The guest views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are their own. The information presented is for general information purposes only and is not intended to be legal advice. Beyond the Doors is produced in studios in San Diego, California and Tijuana, Baja California. Olis Media is an IVC media company.
Olis Media.
The Dear San Diego podcast is produced in collaboration with The Times of San Diego, repeatedly recognized by the San Diego Press Club The Times of San Diego delivers timely and transparent news to, for, and about America's finest city. To learn more on how you can support this trusted resource of information, visit timesofsandiego.com.